All right, so let's get started. Where did we leave off? Well, when we were last talking about social psychology, we were talking about happiness. And this is one of the, I think, more interesting lectures of the semester, because if there's one thing that you would want social psychology to tell you something about, it would be, how could you live your life in a more satisfying or happy way? And a lot of social psychologists are hip to this idea and have dove in to this area called positive psychology that's completely dedicated to trying to get answers to this question of how can we be happier, what is the happy life, what's the good life. And this area, is called positive psychology. So we talked about we laid some of the groundwork for positive psychology, some of the key figures, some of the methods that they tend to use. And then, in kind of strange and ironic fashion, we talked about all the stuff that doesn't make you happy. We talked about it so much that you would almost think the area was called negative psychology, but it's not. We talked about the imposter phenomenon. We talked about money. Money doesn't make you happy, just like all those aphorisms, just like the movie Citizen Kane. Possessions don't make you as happy as experiences do. And excessive rumination and fixation on problems does not make you happier, and so on. Then we talked about two categories of sources of happiness. We finally switched to what does make you happy. And there's two categories. There's sort of fleeting sources of happiness, like these things. And those are, they're good, I guess. They make you happy. But positive psychologists are more interested in more enduring sources of happiness. What are some things, some behaviors, activities you can engage in that will make you kind of chronically more happy than you would be otherwise? And here were some of those things. And we started going kind of fast, so I'll recap some of these things. Relationships. Relationships make you happy, be they friendships or romantic relationships. Relationships make you happy. They connect you to other people. They can be a source of social support when you're down, when you're in times of need. They can be your Pennebaker essay exercise, right? Give you people that you can communicate your problems and troubles to and get things off your chest and begin to feel better, triggering your affective immune system. Also, pro-social behavior makes you happier. A lot of people think this is sort of puzzling. Why would it be that doing things for other people would make you happier? And for whatever reason, it does. Charitable giving and volunteering may seem like a way to benefit other people in the world, and it surely is, but then it is also a way that you can make yourself happier as well. Helping friends. And then this is a big one, which I don't know, I don't remember if I returned to this later in the lecture, but expressing gratitude. Gratitude is an interesting thing. There's been a lot of research on this over the last 4 or 5 years, and I've conducted a little bit of research on gratitude. Gratitude is very interesting because it's sort of subtle. For some reason, research has shown that if you have gratitude and you're grateful for the things that you've been given in life, then you'll tend to be happier, you'll tend to have a more positive perspective on life. And this kind of makes sense, right? Like a lot of times, we spend a lot of time thinking about the things that we don't have, the things we ought to have, we want to have, and not thinking about the things we do have, and thinking about how well off we are for having all the things that we do have. And if you think about our position here, and I'm not saying that people didn't fight for this. A lot of you, fought tooth and nail to get into this university and get into this position in life. But you're right on the precipice of an incredibly successful life, or you're really in it already. You're at this absurdly prestigious university I could never have gotten into straight out of high school. I admire all of you for it. I don't know what you did. I guess you did well in classes or something like that. I did not even consider this strategy when I was in high school. But very wise of you to do that. And so you're here, right, and you're on your way to a very successful life, professional life, hopefully personal life as well, and you got to have gratitude for where you are. You got to be grateful for the opportunities that have been extended to you. Even if you came from, what you consider to be the bottom and went up against all odds, nonetheless, you're here, right? You made it this far, and you need to be grateful. Maybe that gratitude is directed towards your own efforts, the helping hand your parents or significant friends or significant others gave you along the way. I don't know where you direct it towards, but it is a useful perspective on life to focus on what you have and how well off you are for having it, and not what you don't. And if you think about how many people in the entire world are dying to trade places with you, or with me, or with us, right? Then it would be in a way wrong not to be grateful for everything that we have. So, other stuff, yes. So generosity is its own reward. Pro-social behavior and pro-social feelings like gratitude are good for you. They make you feel better about life. They make you happier. Oh, by the way, I have a friend who actually teaches his kids. Every night at dinner, he's like, he has them express gratitude about something, like say, identify something they feel grateful towards or grateful about in their life, like something that they're happy they have. And it can be like something really specific or something really diffuse. And the point of that exercise isn't so much, you know, to have his kids say the thing as to like get them to all day look around their lives for things that they have, that they're grateful for having, and sort of reframe the way that they look at their life from not like, oh, I don't have that toy, or, you know, I don't have nearly as many candy bars as I deserve, but more, you know, what do I have that I'm lucky for having? And he and his wife are very effective, I think, in like kind of changing their perspective, changing their kids' perspective on life for the better. And they're buying fewer toys and candy bars as a result. Very clever of them. Other stuff that makes you happy: exercise, physical activity, fitness. Now, going to do these things doesn't make you happy. It's a total drag. But then you're actually doing them, and then, you know, afterwards, and then the effect it has on your everyday life is very positive. And believe me, I find that very difficult to say to you, but it is just true. It is true. Okay. And then a subtle thing that makes you happy, which we talked about, and I mispronounced this guy's name, even though I was like so ridiculously proud of myself for being able to, and then it turned out I had it all wrong. But Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, which is something like his name, he has this concept that he identified called flow, which is an interesting thing that makes you happy, which not a lot of people were aware of before. It's sort of subtle. And it's different from other stuff like pro-social behaviors or volunteering, where you could just kind of change your life to include more feelings of gratitude or more volunteering or sustaining better friendships and relationships with people. This one's a little bit subtler. It's something you might find yourself in situations. It's more of a situational source of happiness, not like a big enduring one. But it's not as fleeting as sex, drugs, and rock and roll or whatever, you know. It's somewhere in between. And they found this from doing these beeper studies, where they would beep people and say, what are you doing right now? You know, how happy are you? And they found that there's this interesting thing called flow that makes people happy. And flow is when you become totally immersed in a task that is both challenging and stimulating, but well-suited to your abilities. So this is very interesting. It's interesting. So we actually are really happy when we do some task that really challenges our mental and possibly physical faculties, pushes us right to the edge, where we're like completely consumed and immersed in the task, but it doesn't push us over the edge, right? We're not over that edge and into, I'm overstrained, I feel bad at this task, I'm overtaxed. Like trying to juggle, 5 balls at once is something maybe none of us here can do, or like maybe 1 or 2 of you can do or something. And that would be frustrating. You would not be in flow. But for those of you who can juggle, 3 balls at once, that would actually be the kind of thing, if you could do it continually, you might lose yourself in it. It fully taxes your consciousness. You become consumed in the task, and you enjoy it. So examples: shooting baskets, rallies in tennis or table tennis. I love table tennis. And the worst is when you play with somebody who tries to win on every point, right? You get no flow, I mean, you might beat them because they're fooling themselves, but like, you get no flow, and that's like part of what's fun about it, A good conversation, dancing, etc. So in flow, your non-conscious is fully occupied, your conscious mind is active and occupied, guiding your non-conscious. Your self-consciousness is subdued. You have no time to be like, what are my worries? What are my concerns? Am I attractive? All these things that you might worry about are just subdued and distracted. And in a way, it's sort of like an active meditation, because you lose yourself in it, but you're active. You're doing stuff, and that's how you lose yourself. Okay, so that's flow. Flow is cool. Can you be quiet back there? Thank you. Okay, meditation. Meditation is another thing that tends to make people happy. Not so much at the time, but longer term. When you're meditating, it's really the absence of thought and feeling and emotion. You sort of empty your brain. That's what I'm told is the purpose of it. I am terrible at meditation. As you might guess, I'm sort of the opposite of meditation. So. But I admire people who do meditate. My sister's really into meditation. She's good at it. It's really, really good for her. Meditation makes you happier. Longer term, it increases your ability to regulate your emotions, which is interesting because you're sort of emptying your brain, emptying your thoughts, trying not to think about anything. It's interesting that would make you better at regulating your emotions and not getting excessively aroused or not in the way that you're maybe thinking, like excessively, like physiologically, emotionally aroused. And then it decreases anxiety and stress. There's tons of research on that. And it could also help you put things in proper perspective. which I guess makes sense, that there's this tendency we have to be consumed by small thoughts and concerns and worries that occupy today or tonight or this afternoon or something that are very short-term concerns. But if you can forget about, how many emails are in your inbox you haven't responded to, or this little assignment that isn't, super important that you're going to get done anyway, or all those exams you have 3 weeks from now, if you can get all that stuff out of your head long enough, it'll somehow reset your priorities and you'll think about the things that matter more. So you may consider meditation as a way to increase your happiness and your mental subjective well-being. Also, counseling, therapy, these are things that tend to make people happy, especially if you have something significant that's kind of haunting you and preventing you from being happy. Just like with the Pennebaker essay exercise, counseling and therapy can help you address that. Also, your biological set point. This one's kind of a bummer, right? You can't really change this. You can't really go and change your genetic makeup, but there is a belief that we may all be born with a certain kind of baseline level of happiness, which is sort of our set point, and we kind of struggle to move it around. Some really, really good chronic long-term habits might lead you to be able to move it up or move it down, but in general, it'll be pretty set. So your biological set point, sorry to bring that up, but that actually has something to do with your happiness. And what else? Well, we don't know. Positive psychology is a really fascinating area, and it's discovering new things all the time. This is a pretty up-to-date survey of the stuff where the data's really in, and we're very confident about these findings. But there's other things that we're not so sure about. And you can pick up a psychology journal and see what the cutting-edge positive psychology research is saying. There's obviously a lot of demand for this, right? Everybody wants to know what makes you happy. And so there's popular books. Positive psychologists publish popular books at a higher rate than probably any other kind of social scientist, because there's just this hunger, this thirst for more insights on what could make you happy. And so Dan Gilbert wrote a book called Stumbling on Happiness, and Csikszentmihalyi wrote a book called Flow, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's tons of books on positive psychology, and happiness hypothesis is obviously one of those. But did you have the experience reading Haidt's happiness hypothesis that it wasn't like totally about happiness, Like, I kind of thought the whole book was going to be about happiness, like 10 chapters of happiness, and it was more like 2 chapters, or maybe even 1, yeah. It's kind of weird. I actually really liked the other chapters, so I didn't really mind it, and that's why I assign it here. I think it's a better book for not just being about happiness. But anyway, I don't know, it kind of surprised me. Okay. Okay. What are we not so sure about? Status. Status is an interesting thing. We already did the status lecture, so this is kind of returning to this concept of status. Status, there's this debate. Does status make you happier or not? So here's some ways in which status and the achievement and attainment of status in your life might not lead you to happiness. So, 1, wanton ambition, competitiveness, and assessing yourself relative to other people tends to undermine life satisfaction. This whole thing where status is by definition, as we've all learned, relative, right? You can't be high status without people in your group or in your reference group being low status in comparison to you. And so as a result, you can't be high status without other people being low status, either in your mind or in the group's mind or what have you. And this is inherently a competitive dynamic that involves putting yourself above the people around you. That obviously is not very consistent with things like gratitude, developing good relationships, pro-social behavior. Putting yourself over other people around you, kind of the opposite idea. And that's part of why we think that the wanton pursuit of status is not so good for you, not a really healthy thing. Pursuit of wealth as a way to get status, we already talked about that. You could call it like the Citizen Kane effect if you want. People don't actually feel happier when they have lots of money. Having enough money to get by, that's damned important, but beyond that, doesn't have a big impact on your happiness. Purchase of status symbols and luxury items, that seems like it would make you happy, having all that bling, but it doesn't. It doesn't, or so research suggests. Also, ambition, the pursuit of status, can cause you stress. Because what happens, right? Like, you drive yourself to be as successful as possible, say, in this reference group amongst undergraduates at Berkeley. And you should strive for success. Don't get me wrong. Get great grades, advance your life and your career. I think that's great. But being consumed by this relentless ambition to advance yourself in reference groups can be a soulless, all-consuming task which you will never satisfy. Why? Because you'll keep moving on to new reference groups, right? Like, let's say you can totally kick ass in this reference group, and you can be one of the best people, most respected people in this reference group. Well, then what happens? You get promoted to a new reference group, right? You get brought to some other reference group wherein you will then have to struggle your way up to the top of that. And then what happens? You get promoted until eventually, you're a senator, but you're still not the president, right? I mean, there's nowhere it can end where you're really at the top, where you're at the top of the top. They keep putting you in these new groups where you then are like, oh, crap, I got to start all over again, you know? And indeed, that's what going to graduate school is like. So, yeah, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Go to graduate school. And I'm not telling you not to succeed. I mean, it would be pretty foolhardy for me to tell a room full of Berkeley undergraduates not to succeed because you're well on your way already, and I commend that. And I think it's one of the things I really respect about all of you. But I think that there's a way to succeed that's healthy, and there's a way to try to succeed that isn't. You know, and that relentless, all-consuming ambition and an effort to put yourself above the other people around you, that's really not the right motivation. You know, you should be doing it for yourself, for your family, because it somehow fulfills you. You know, do it for the right reasons, not the wrong ones. Don't do it in such a way that it divides you from other people. Okay, so what are some ways in which status and status achievement do lead to happiness? Okay, so one is higher status people, research shows, they tend to experience less stress, lower blood pressure, they tend to live longer, and have greater security. So they're, you know, less likely to, well, you know, if you have wealth and comfort and you're successful, you're not on the edge, you're not about to lose it all at any point in time, right, because you have more. Also, higher status tends to lead people to pay you respect. It leads to popularity. It can lead to relationships. What you're seeing here is two very different ways to pursue status, right? There's a way to pursue status and attain status wherein it will reduce your stress, lead to relationships, and lead to respect. And there's a way to pursue status that can undermine all that stuff. So attaining, being in a high status position tends to be good for all this stuff, but this kind of relentless, wanton ambition, not so good for this stuff. I don't know if this distinction is clear. In a very weird way, you have to sort of get it without trying to get it too hard. You have to try not too hard to get it, but somehow get it, and then that'd be great. So don't try, just do. This is getting very Yoda-like, right? This is very weird. This is kind of impossible, what I'm telling you to do. But I don't know that it is. It's some sort of, I mean, you know, every time you talk about happiness and you try to synthesize it all and put it together into a single message, you end up sounding like a Buddhist. Like the Buddhists, they got it. They got it figured out. They're like, do the middle path, you know? Try, you know, succeed and all that. But, you know, don't overdo it, you know, and don't be too self-focused. I don't know. You know, they have it figured out. So, and Haidt is the same way. Or Haidt has the same observation where he's like, yeah, you know, the Buddhists got it all figured out. Okay. So maybe it's ambition and the relentless pursuit of status that's unhealthy, but actually having status is good for your physical and mental health. I'm scared to ask her questions because it's so obvious that there are holes that can be poked in this very confusing message. But are there questions? Yes. Outstanding question. Okay, so this observation that higher status people have higher physical or higher quality physical health, less stress, and all this stuff. How can you separate that out from just a wealth effect? You know, that wealthier people tend to be higher status, and wealthier people have better access to health care, medicines, and all that stuff. Outstanding question. There's a whole area of research in public health dedicated to answering this, and they do careful statistical controls where they try to say, okay, taking out income, wealth, access to health care, how does relative position and having these sort of more respected characteristics like occupational status, how does that impact your health? And they've done stuff, for example, where they've surveyed public employees in Britain and said, okay, all these people have the same income in this whole bandwidth because they have this very regulated income system for public servants in Britain. But some of them are more respected than others. Some are managers, others are not managers, and so on. And so they're able to say, okay, these people are higher status than these people, but they all make the same money. And they find that the higher status people live longer, are less sick, you know, stuff like that. And so now you're probably wondering, okay, well, if it's not money, you know, what is it then, you know? Because it can't just be that just being high status just makes you healthier, right? There must be something that drives that. And indeed, we don't really know. We don't really know. It's a big mystery. And if you can be the person that figures this out, why it is that high status makes you healthier, then you'd be making a big contribution to social science. One thing that we do know is that it seems to be true across species. So when you look at non-human primates, you find that higher status non-human primates, where maybe the highest status, you know, primate in some group, they tend to experience less stress and as a result be healthier. Because when you have a lot of stress, because you're, I guess, not at the top or you're trying to figure out your way to get to the top, When you have more stress, you tend to pump more cortisol. And when you pump more cortisol, you're kind of on edge all the time. You're kind of nervous. You're looking for a challenge. You're looking to win a competition. You're stressed out that you might lose a competition and go down in your hierarchy. And your body invests in that and not in your physical immune system functioning. So we may end up getting the answer to this question by looking at non-human primates, which Robert Sapolsky has done in a book called The Trouble with Testosterone, which you might check out. It's a really good, popular book. This was a longer answer than you wanted, and I'm sorry about that. Okay, so it's a little bit of a mystery why it is that status makes you healthier, but it seems to. Okay, so some quotes about happiness. Woody Allen, to love is to suffer. To avoid suffering, one must not love, but then one suffers from not loving. Therefore, to love is to suffer. Not to love is to suffer. To suffer is to suffer. To be happy is to love. To be happy then is to suffer, but suffering makes one unhappy. Therefore, to be unhappy, one must love, or love to suffer, or suffer from too much happiness. I hope you're all getting this down. Here's an Albert Schweitzer quote. Success is not the key to happiness. Happiness is the key to success. If you love what you are doing, you will be successful. This is the picture I used to have on the front page of this thing. These people are terrifyingly happy in this picture. I shrunk it down. It's not nearly as scary as it was before. It was such a weird thing to have on the front page, like happiness. Learn about happiness like these deliriously happy, terrifyingly insane people did. Yeah. And then sometimes your joy is the source of your smile, but sometimes your smile can be the source of your joy. Thich Nhat Hanh, who my sister's actually really into, he's a Buddhist. And this idea is very similar to the cognitive dissonance idea, right? That we think that thought precedes behavior, that we have some thought, and then we behave, we're happy, and then we smile. But it's just as much the case that the causality runs the opposite direction. And this is one of the main findings from social psychology, that that sometimes your behavior can lead to your thought, that you could have the smile and then feel happy. And this is a great quote about happiness. Happiness is as a butterfly which, when pursued, is always beyond our grasp, but which, if you will sit down quietly, may alight upon you. Nathaniel Hawthorne. Now that sounds Buddhist, right? Like that you're going to get happiness when you stop trying to catch it, and when you stop trying to catch it, then it might just land on you, like a butterfly. If you want others to be happy, practice compassion. If you want to be happy, practice compassion, the Dalai Lama. Okay, and that's the end of the happiness lecture. So let's take like a 2-3 minute break, and then we'll do the relationships lecture. Okay, all right, if I can get your attention, we're back. We're talking about relationships. So, the relationships lecture. I enjoy giving this lecture, because this lecture is oriented towards lots of big fundamental questions that many of you may wonder about, whether you admit it or not. I bet you've wondered about some of these questions. Okay, so what are some of the big questions that research on relationships in social psychology is oriented towards trying to give answers to? So one of these is what makes relationships work? What are some common pitfalls, and what differentiates long and short-term relationships, which in a sense is asking the big question, how can you know? How can you know when you're in a relationship that's just going to be short-term versus you're in a relationship that maybe has some longer-term potential? And that's a big question that you might wonder about. Okay, so how can you know what you want? Okay, well, this is an interesting piece of research that came out about a year ago, or about 13, 14 months ago, where they tried to answer the question, how can you know what you want in a relationship? It seems very easy, right? Like if I was to ask any of you, what are you looking for in a husband or a wife or a boyfriend or a girlfriend or something like that, you could probably list a bunch of characteristics, and it would be, a list of characteristics of the things that you find desirable in other people or in a romantic relationship. But this research suggested actually identifying what it is that you want in a relationship is surprisingly hard. And why is this? Well, probably because it goes back to that same old idea that we talked about a few times in this class, many times in this class, the Nisbet and Wilson 77 idea that we have a limited awareness of the causes of our thoughts and behaviors. See you guys. All right. They're missing out. They're missing out. This is big, that many failed relationships will ensue. Okay, so this is one of the big ideas from the class, right? That we just don't have as much insight on our thoughts and behaviors as we probably think we do. So recent research shows that this same principle tends to apply to romantic attraction as well. And in romantic realms, we are again like that rider atop the elephant, trying to direct the elephant, but actually having very limited control. And maybe we're really not in that much control at all. And I think by the end of this little subset of this lecture that you might buy this idea. And having read this paper, I really buy this idea as well. Okay, so there's some recent research that was on this subject, and they studied speed dating, but that's not the only thing they studied, actually. I'm kind of misrepresenting this research. Eastwick and Finkel, 2008, studied both speed dating and then also, normal dating, which is probably preferable, I would argue. I don't know. I've never done speed dating. Anybody willing to volunteer and say they've done speed dating? Nobody. All right. Thank you, sir. All right. I'm open to it. I'm open to it. I just haven't done it. Okay. So past research shows that mate preferences are heavily gendered. I was showing this to somebody yesterday, and she was like, why do you keep saying mate preferences like they're like animals or something? And I was like, I don't know. But I know that a lot of research on romantic attraction tends to look cross-species and say, what are the same, which is weird, but they do this. And so they tend to refer to mates because it's not always humans. So anyway, past research on your preferences for romantic partners, we'll say, are heavily gendered. That when you ask people what they want in a romantic partner, they tend to give what might be sort of the stereotypical responses. So men report greater concern for the attractiveness of their partner. So men, more than women, say they want an attractive, young partner. And then women tend to say that they're more interested in resources. They want like a wealthier, or they don't necessarily say it that way, but like, a guy with a stable income. By the way, this is heterosexual relationships. My apologies for over-focusing on heterosexual relationships. But that's what most of the research is on. So women report they want a guy with like a stable job, who's a good provider and all that stuff. They're more open to like an older man, partly because he is more likely to be these things. And they report being less concerned about attractiveness, less preferring of youth, and so on. So Eastwick and Finkel found that, okay, so I should preface this say, 30 years of research on what men and women are looking for in romantic relationships has all converged on these findings. This is what women want. This is what men want. It's the same thing all the stereotypes say. It's the same thing that evolutionary theories would say, that men are looking for, incredibly fertile women who will have many children, and women are looking for guys with enough resources to care for these children. It fits with the evolutionary story, fits with your stereotypes. It's been shown across cultures and so on. Everybody just assumes this is true. This is one of those cases where all those cultural stereotypes, they're true. But as it turns out, they're probably not. Eastwick and Finkel found no gender differences in their research on speed dating and on, normal dating. No offense, man. And in terms of the preferences that were revealed through their behavior. So when people would do all this speed dating or do dating in their everyday life, and they would essentially assemble a choice set, right? Like when you're dating people, there's these people you could commit to varying degrees, and then you do date them for longer or shorter periods of time. When you do speed dating, at the end of it, you indicate, I don't know how this works, but I think you indicate like who you want to then date or get the number of, or no, you're supposed to trade numbers in the little interaction. I don't know. I got to watch Hitch again or something. So, or better yet, the 40-year-old virgin. So, much better yet. So, so when you look at this, when you look at people's choice set, and then you have them rate these people on these characteristics, and then you ask them what characteristics are you looking for, and then you say who did they wind up dating. There's no match. There's no match. The things that people say they're looking for don't predict the people they wind up dating from the people that they meet, which is very interesting, right? These people think they know what they want. All the social scientists and psychologists, they think they know what people want, but they got it wrong. They got it wrong. So what people say they want isn't particularly predictive of who they wind up falling for. Men think they want attractiveness more than anything else. Women think they don't care as much. There's actually no relationship in this research between gender and tendencies to choose the most attractive available partner. Women want attractiveness apparently just as much as men do. Women think that they want men with resources more than anything else. Men think that they don't care as much. But again, if you look at the choices that these people were making in these studies, there isn't really any correlation there. And in fact, there's no gender differences on either dimension in the actual choices made by men and women. I don't know why I said in fact, because that's the same thing. Okay, whatever. Okay, so in general, people's ideal mate preferences didn't correspond with the mates that they wound up choosing to be with. So people seem, in this research anyway, to only think they know what they want, which is one of those big takeaways from the class, right? That people think they know what causes and motives and values are driving their behavior, but they don't actually have as good a hold on that as they think they do. So this challenges decades of mate preference studies, all of which trusted self-reports. That's the failing here, right? We just asked people, what are you looking for? What makes you commit to somebody? What's your ideal mate? We didn't look at what they actually did and what their choices were. We over-relied on self-report data. It also challenges gender stereotypes and common assumptions about how you find somebody, right? You think that you find somebody by, lining up your preferences, the people that you have to choose from. Well, I don't know if that's how you think you do it. That's kind of gross. But something really romantic like that. You would think that's how you would do it, right? But it turns out it's not so much the case. And one of the big takeaways from this research, I think, is that you don't choose the people that you fall for. Instead, the love or romantic attraction chooses you. And anybody who's ever fallen in love knows that this is exactly how it feels, right? You don't meet somebody and go, okay, she's got a nice 401k and, sufficiently attractive, and yet it doesn't work like that, right? You don't consult your preferences and say, does it fit? You don't go through the checklist. You don't do that at all, not even close to that. In fact, when you're in love, you are one of the dumbest people on earth, right? Like, you're not thinking. Your conscious thought is gone. You're consumed and overtaken by these feelings and emotions, and very much it is the case that love chooses you and not the other way around. So this is very interesting. I don't know what it means. I don't know if it means you should stop trying, you should give up your preferences. The takeaway, I think, is up to you. It's very new research, but I think it's a very interesting insight that we need not be analyzing and strategizing this whole thing so much or obsessing about what we want. Instead, it might be better to just kind of meet more people, and then more of these things will choose you, and then you can say, is this good enough? But anyway, we're not done with the lecture, so. I didn't call. She's first. Yeah. Just one second.
So when they're actually looking at what they prefer and then what they actually choose,
Yeah.
students have to look at resources, but how do they check out technically different people find different things.
Oh, yeah. They don't do any kind of objective measures of attraction. They have you rate. So if you're in the speed dating study, you'd say, these 30 people that I met in the speed dating, here's how attractive I thought all of them were. Here's how much resources I got the impression they had, stuff like that. And then none of those things correlated with who they wound up being with. And the gender stereotypes didn't persist either, where the women tend to go for the more resources. One interesting thing is I think that's a very conservative test, right? Because it's actually the case that when you do fall for somebody, you tend to find them more attractive, right? And so that's a pretty conservative test, because that person you're falling for should bleed into those ratings, and yet nonetheless there was no correlation. Kind of surprising. Yes, sir? So I think there's different logics on dating websites, right? So one of them is the whole eHarmony thing, like we'll match you with somebody really similar to you, which seems to be their logic. There is definitely some social scientific support for that logic of you're going to fall in love with yourself, and we need only find that person who's most like you, and then your narcissism will lead you to love them. So that eHarmony logic is not totally messed up, but I don't know that it's as tested as they would like you to believe. They're all into this relationship lab, and they got guys in white lab coats who are dropping chemicals into vials. It has nothing to do with what they're actually doing, So I don't know. I don't want to criticize their algorithm. They're really secretive about it too. I knew somebody who did this in-depth, tried to get into their relationship lab thing and find out what they're doing, and they're very freaky and guarded about the whole thing. So I don't know. They may, if they're smart, what they're doing is saying, attraction is a combination of similarity, but also certain complementary differences on certain criteria, and then also prioritize similarity, where you really want to be similar on some stuff you feel really strongly about. So maybe your religious values or something like that, or lack of them, might be really, really important to you and your mate preferences. For somebody else, might be more their political values, and you'd want to take that into account, rather than just assume some kind of general truth about that. Then for the other kinds of dating websites where they say, I guess they let you choose, but they have people, relay information back and forth. I think that logic's okay. And then they let you filter and search based on the criteria of what you think you're looking for or whatever. that might be a little bit flawed. That's definitely one of the takeaways from this research. And I have a friend who's been dating somebody for like 3 or 4 months who popped up like accidentally or something on his search where he'd screwed up his search. And then it's the one person that he really, fell for that he's ever found on one of these online dating things. So I just don't know. But then, here's the thing is, what if this is totally right and there's no correspondence between what you think you're looking for and what you'll find, and you're still not finding people in your everyday life at the rate you'd like to? How are you supposed to search the entire population of like Match.com? It doesn't make any sense. So you can't do that. You got to carve it down somehow. So I guess you're in kind of a dilemma where you almost have to assume this research is wrong, Or maybe the way to do it would just be to look more broadly, is just say, okay, I assume my preferences, I don't have great insight on them, but I'll assume I have some insight on them, and so I'll just broaden my search and say, oh, maybe I am interested in, men or women or whatever that are as much as 10 years or younger or older than me, not 5 or something, or 3 or whatever. Or you all are young, so you can't even begin to do that, right? If you were to search Match.com for people 10 years younger than you, you would be like arrested in minutes or something, right? Okay, so I think I would be too, actually. So moving on. Man, I'm going to get in trouble on this one. Okay. More stuff on relationships. How can you know when a relationship isn't working and why? Does anyone know what this is a picture of? It's very freaky. It's very strange. This is in the relationships lecture. This is a picture of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, which is very weird. Okay. So why would I bring this up? Because that's what happens when you fall in love. It's just misery and death and destruction. The world ends. Just kidding. Okay, so the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse is this very melodramatic expression for these 4 characteristics of unhealthy romantic relationships that this one researcher has identified. Somebody said 5? Is there 5? I thought I heard somebody say 5. Okay, it's 4 as far as I know. So if you want a relationship to work, these are things to work on. These aren't necessarily, I don't want you to be like, aha, I have one of these 4 horsemen of the apocalypse things going on in my relationship. I'm going home and breaking up with my boyfriend tonight. I'm not saying that at all. I have no idea, and I'm not taking that responsibility. My apologies if, don't do that. Okay, so if you want a relationship to work, though, these are things to either work on, and if you're trying to diagnose a relationship's health, then these are maybe warning signs. So I'm not telling you whether to work on these things or, use them as signs to just get out. I think this is a funny picture. Okay. So I think it's from a Japanese soap opera, but I don't know. Okay. So the 4 horsemen, what are they? One of them is criticism. These are 4 traits of relationships that might suggest the relationship is not going well. One of them is criticism. Now, is it the case that you can never criticize or say something negative in a relationship? Yes, that is the case. No, I'm just kidding. You're not supposed to, or it's unhealthy to, attack or criticize your partner's character or personality. It's instead a very good idea, not to focus. Okay, you also should not focus on winning arguments. Woe to the person in a relationship who believes you can win an argument in a relationship in any sort of traditional sense of winning an argument. I can't tell you how liberating it's been to read this article or read about this research and discover that I should stop trying to win relationship arguments. Because as you get closer and closer to that thing you're trying to do, you're trying to win, and you got it all laid out, your argument's perfect, hers or his or whatever is wrong, and it's just obviously the case, you've actually gotten further from anything you would ever want. If you were to actually win the argument, you're worse off than if you lost. It's be like, okay, you win. Okay, all right, you win. You don't want that. That's not. If you win, that's the thing you want, right? You want them to concede. You won, and you're right, and you got to. No, you don't. You don't actually want that. It's the thing you don't want. So it's very important not to try so hard to win arguments, and it's important not to attack or criticize a partner's character. Instead, you should try to decouple what they've done or their behavior that maybe irritated you or bothered you from their character. Don't criticize who they are. Criticize things they've done, and don't do that incessantly. Okay, another one, contempt. Surprisingly, contempt is bad for relationships. I was personally shocked by this. But insulting your partner with the intent of making him or her feel bad about themselves is a very, very bad thing. So you should, again, decouple your criticisms from the person's character and not be trying to make them feel bad or detect that the other person has contempt for you and is trying to make you feel bad. Some signs of contempt Putting yourself above your partner and saying, I'm better than my partner, include like eye rolls, sneering. If you're doing these things, you should probably stop. Okay, some other stuff. Kind of the flip side. Taking things personally unnecessarily when it is not necessary, or even when it's borderline or it's a vague gray area and it's open to taking it personally or not. You should try wherever possible to put the best foot forward and not take it personally, so don't be defensive. Defensiveness. Don't take all criticisms personally. Also, don't do cross-complaining, where you answer complaints with other complaints. Instead, I mean, this is tempting, right? If you're getting defensive, somebody's criticizing you, you want to be like, yes, you say that, but here's something that sucks about you. You know? And this is not good. This is not good. Believe it or not. Believe it or not, this is not good. Now, I know a lot of this seems really obvious, but I swear to God, codifying it and laying it out, so you're like, these are specific behaviors to avoid, these are specific sentiments to try not to feel or to avoid or to keep your partner from feeling or whatever, is actually extraordinarily useful, I think. So anyway, one behavioral symptom of this cross-complaining thing is yes, but. Apparently, you're never supposed to say yes, but. Instead, you're supposed to just take it. Just take it. No. I don't know. I didn't mean that. Okay, all right. So we'll recap these in a second. Okay, another one. Don't do. Stonewalling. As you might bet, stonewalling is heavily gendered. Stonewalling is emotional withdrawal as a way to handle conflict, where there's a conflict or a fight going on, and one party just takes off, jumps in his Trans Am, and goes to the beach or something like that. This is apparently bad. It's typified by specific behaviors like silence, changing the subject, leaving the scene of the argument, and it's not good. You can guess, yes, men tend to do the stonewalling thing more than women do. Definitely. There's women like, definitely. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so don't. Now, these are bad symptoms, but they don't necessarily mean the person feeling them is like the wrong party or something like that. The stonewaller is not necessarily bad. The person getting defensive is not necessarily bad. They may be getting actually personally criticized. It's not as cut and dry as that. I mean, I think one of the big things when you're in a relationship is you're through the looking glass, and there's no winning arguments. There's no right or wrong. Everything's become subjective and about how people feel, and you got to realize that. So don't personalize criticism. Express contempt for the other person. Get defensive about complaints or arguments unnecessarily. If somebody is personally criticizing you, tell them that's messed up. Don't withdraw from discussions or arguments. See them through if you can. Okay, so again, we're giving you all these things not to do. So what should you do? You should complain at a more specific level about actions or behaviors that bothered you or you can't deal with. Don't complain so much about the person. Listen. Surprising advice. You never hear that about relationships. But you should listen. And you should also make an effort to validate your partner's points, wherever possible. It tends to reduce the tendency to get defensive, and it can really chill your partner out, too. If you're trying to get your partner to stop being so personal and just be like, look, I know what you're talking about with this, and I agree. And that helps. That helps a lot. And show gratitude. One thing, have you ever heard of the compliment sandwich? The compliment sandwich? You ever heard of this? Right. Okay. My girlfriend's big on the compliment sandwich. So you're supposed to give like one compliment, one just leveling criticism, and then another very small compliment. And then some people think this makes everything okay. No, the compliment sandwich is a really good idea. You go compliment, criticism, compliment, make them big compliments. Like, of course, you're the best person in the world, but you haven't done the dishes in 2 years. I really love you. Perfect example. That's what you should do. And that's going to work better than just do the friggin' dishes, as you would imagine. But actually, people who've studied this have found a different ratio to be useful. The compliment sandwich, you need to amp that ratio up, like past even club sandwich levels. You need to get that ratio. Club sandwiches work in a 3-to-2 ratio. You need to go, way up from there. You need to go 100-to-1. No, just kidding, 5-to-1. 5 times as much positive commentary as negative commentary would probably be a good idea. And then they'll be more likely, whoever you're talking, if you're actually trying to work on it and get the person to address the negative thing that is bothering you, this is a wise idea. If you actually are just trying to criticize them, you should get out of that relationship. Okay. Any questions about this? Okay. Yes, sir. Yeah. So. Tell me about the past aggressive behavior one again, like. Uh-huh. That's honest. Yeah. No, I think. Yeah. I mean, I think you could collapse these down to a more parsimonious list of things of like, be compassionate, don't be an egotist, don't be so friggin' sensitive, and don't be a total jerk to your partner, or something like that. There'd be a way to make a more parsimonious list of this. And I think what he's trying to do is behaviorize them more. I know that's not a word. They never use that word. But I think what this guy that made the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse is trying to do is sort of say, at a more concrete level, what should you not do, And so I agree that you could make this into a more general theory about how you should enact yourself in these kinds of situations. But he's trying to break it down to a more behavioral level because then it's more actionable. It's easier for you to be like, wait, I'm in a relationship, I'm criticizing my partner, and I'm about to leave. That's not good, Like you shouldn't just be like, up yours and leave, That's the opposite of what you're supposed to do. And you could perhaps stop yourself from doing that. Whereas if you had this advice of like, be compassionate and, don't be a jerk all the time, how do you do, that might be harder to do, especially if you are an uncompassionate jerk, Yeah. Okay, so I take your question to be, how does this advice interact with the kind of cognitive dissonance takeaway that thought and behavior are tightly linked, and thought tends to follow behavior? I would say that that link, that fallacy that we have, that we think thought precedes behavior, but it actually follows behavior just as much, works really well with this research. One of the reasons that we take criticisms, from romantic partners to be, so terrible. One of the reasons they feel so bad is because we're inferring the person behaved this way because of the obvious correspondent thought of they hate me, they dislike me, they have contempt for me, and so on. So when they show apparent contempt or criticize you excessively, you get your feelings hurt, right? But in fact, that may not really be the motive. The person may be insecure or reacting to something you did, or they might be, they might be a really negative person or whatever. So that's one important thing is that assumption we make that people had the obvious correspondent thought before the behavior is part of why this is really good advice. But then also I think this is good advice because of the fact that that thought tends to follow behavior. Because if you can act in these constructive, positive ways, then you may develop a more healthy sort of mentality about your relationship that then leads you to not have to follow all these instructions later. You just feel less contempt. You just feel less driven to criticize your partner at a personal level. You feel less defensive because you've kind of practiced this, and you are less defensive, Yes?
Does this work outside of theory? Have people actually been able to, change their criticism? Or I just feel like it would be really, really hard for you to long-term change those behaviors.
Has this worked outside of theory? I believe so. I mean, that's what I've been told, but I haven't read they don't publish this research in the same way that they publish the kinds of articles I'm more used to reading. But while these are all traits of poorly functioning relationships, I would say that the empirical research on changing these things and then the relationship does better could be stronger. Relationship counselors and advisors have implemented these things. To what success? It hasn't been as rigorously scientifically studied as I would like it to be. So to a certain extent, these might be more symptoms of a relationship that isn't going well than they are things to work on to make it go better. That part's kind of up for grabs. But the symptoms of relationships aren't going well, that part isn't so up for grabs. These do predict relationship and marriage dissolution at a pretty high level. So the depressing side of the story is true. The nicer part of the story, I don't know. I'd like to see better data on it. Excellent question. Any other questions? Yeah. Yes. Yeah, that's bad. Yeah. I should have mentioned the 5th horseman is cheating. Cheating is always bad. Yeah, or almost always bad. So I don't think there is research on that. The relationship researcher who, kind of crystallized these 4 things, I don't think you would necessarily even say these are the top 4 things, A physical abuse would certainly be worse. Infidelity might be as bad or worse, or, it's hard to say. I think he sort of crystallized these things as like things you might not notice normally, that you might not realize are really bad behaviors that predict relationship dissolution. So that would be more the level to take it at, not these are the top 4 bad things. That would be the wrong way to take it. But yes, infidelity should be worked on, and yeah, definitely. Yeah. Oh, wow. Oh, evaluate your argument. I like that. And see if you're right or not. Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. That's a ridiculous thing. That's totally ridiculous, huh? Because I would give the most slanted take on my side of the argument, right? I mean, I think that hopefully I wouldn't, but I would think I probably would. I would probably always sound like I was right, If I didn't, I would write something else, and then I would, yeah. Yeah. That's funny. Yeah. Like Savage Love or something like that. Those people, you ever read Savage Love? The people that write into that just get hammered. They just get slandered. Doesn't matter what they write. They always present their side, and it's not enough. So good point. And if you email me, I'll find the site on this research, and you can see if they identify these other things you were asking about. Okay, so, oh, shoot, I lost one. Accept responsibility. Oh, yeah, what can you learn from this? Yes, sorry. So take your partner's criticisms seriously and try to think, is there something I could do to actually address this? If you can convince them to criticize you at a more specific level where they're not even criticizing you, they're criticizing the behavior, then you want to reward that and encourage that by actually listening and possibly putting into action their criticism. Okay. So that's what bad relationships look like. But what you might be wondering about now is what does a good relationship look like? What does a relationship that will work long-term tend to look like? Well, it looks like that. It looks like 2 pandas, one panda biting the other one. That's what a functioning relationship looks like. And the sad thing is none of us are pandas. So this is beyond our reach. We can't do it. It'll never happen. Okay, there's some basic stuff. Some basic stuff you would have guessed. Don't do the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Mutual attraction is useful for sustaining a good relationship, as you probably knew. You gotta like each other, okay? I hope you're getting this down, because this is some non-obvious stuff. You got to enjoy spending time with each other. Unbelievable. Okay. Ability to cooperate. I swear, I don't know if they ever did this study, but on the old Newlywed show, do they have this back yet? They would reincarnate it every like 20 years. They had the new Newlywed show in the 80s. This is before your time. Anyway, the Newlywed show, they would have people who had just gotten married, and they'd have to like guess things about each other. They'd ask some question, or they'd have to do some kind of task or cooperative thing together. And I swear to God, you could see which marriages were going to work and which ones weren't. It would be wonderful to actually do a study to see whether you could detect on there. But there'd be people, all sorts of contempt going on. People would be like, I can't believe you don't know that about me. I told you 6 times, like guys forgetting their wives' birthdays and all this stuff. No, they never even did that. They never even took the questions to that level, because it would just be like she would just walk off, right? It would just end the show. But it was really interesting how people, relationships where they can't sustain cooperation on even like simple tasks, that's bad, obviously. But like, it's an interesting thing. Like if you can cooperate and work together to do something together, like a simple thing, like make dinner, this is actually this very positive sign for relationships. Okay. So, Swan et al. In 1994 surveyed 176 married and dating couples, trying to answer the question of what else, beyond all this obvious stuff, what else predicts functioning long-term relationships, or functioning relationships that will become long-term relationships. So, that was our approach. They were like, let's survey married people, married couples, and dating couples and see what's the difference. It's a very simple approach. You're probably already thinking of some problems with this methodology, but it's an interesting methodology. Interesting, kind of first slice on this question of what makes a dating relationship become a married relationship. Well, let's ask people that are in dating relationships and people that are in married relationships and see what the difference is. And what they found was that dating couples, people in dating relationships, tended to be happier about the relationship and feel more intimate with their partner to the extent that their partner, they had the impression their partner saw them very favorably. Okay? So when you're in a dating relationship, what you really want is somebody who thinks you're awesome, you know? You're like, and that makes you feel more intimate with them. It makes you like them more. And you know these kinds of dating relationships where you're like, oh, you're so great, you're so amazing, you're so amazing, oh my God, you know? You're like, no, it is you that is so amazing. You're so amazing. I mean it, really. You're perfect. I can't wait, you know? Anyway, so, and you just go back and forth like that for, about 2.5 months. And so, that makes dating couples feel happier and more intimate with their partners, being viewed in unbelievably positive light. That's what people really like. But married couples have a different sort of makeup. They're happier and feel more intimate with partners who see them as they see themselves, who see them, in other words, realistically, or at least through the same subjective lens that they see themselves. So there seems to be something really different here, right? So married couples, they're going to feel better and more committed if they think that the partner sees them in realistic, correct terms. Anybody know who these people are? Does anybody know? Oh, this is before your time. Okay, all right. Well, never mind. Okay, so this tendency for the dating relationships to feel more intimate to the extent that they're mutual admiration societies, but for married relationships to feel more intimate to the extent they see each other realistically or in the same terms as one another, has been called the marriage shift. It's a big idea in relationship research. So the marriage shift, that something seems to happen between dating relationships and married relationships that allows for this pivot from mutual admiration societies to something more realistic than that. But of course, there's kind of a nasty side to this as well, right? That it means that married people that have negative self-images will prefer partners who see them more negatively. And so there's a kind of nasty side to this, right? Where people with really low self-esteem will end up coupling off with people who, hold them, who maybe have negative views of them as well. So that's not very nice. But in general, the marriage shift is what it is, and when you find yourself married or in that kind of long-term equivalent relationship to being married, you're going to probably feel closer with the person to the extent that you think they see you as you see yourself. And this kind of makes sense, right? Because in a dating relationship, what do? Well, you do a lot of tactical impression management, right? You put on your best, face, you take a shower before the date, things you never do when you get married. You would never do that. I haven't been married myself, so I still shower, but I have heard that the people, when they get married, they don't do this anymore, which is interesting and kind of shocking. So there's like a handful of married people here who are very offended right now, and I apologize to you. But this is the case, right? That when you're in a dating relationship, you make this real effort to put on the best front, right? Because you're trying to get them to like you, right? But then, as the relationship moves on and it becomes a long-term committed relationship, you just can't act all the time. You can't pretend to be the most positive possible version of yourself. You just can't do it, and it would be taxing. It would be tiring. You would find yourself depleted all the time. And what you really need is someone you can live with, right? Someone you can come home, kick off your shoes, and be yourself, and be like, oh man, what a long day it was. I'm not going to pretend with you, maybe we'll go out on a date, and we'll pretend then, that we're better people than we really are. But you need somebody who you can decompress with and be yourself with. And this makes sense, especially when you think about dating relationships. You see the person, maybe, not as much as when you live with them, right? And you just can't live with somebody where you're presenting yourself in this extremely positive light all the time. So, so one of the big questions about the marriage shift is it selection or adaptation? Is it the case that the relationships where people see each other really realistically and accept that and are still committed to that and attracted to that, are those the ones that become marriages? Is it the more realistic dating relationships that end up going long-term, such that you could kind of look at your relationship and say, does this person see me realistically, and do I like that? And then say, oh, then this one has a chance to go long-term? Or is it instead that it's an adaptation? That something else makes dating relationships, or some other things make dating relationships become long-term relationships, become marriages, and then along the way, there tends to be this shift, You move in together, you start living with one another, you reveal, your true self, that all those horrible, horrible things you've been covering up on these dates, and then hopefully they accept that, and then that becomes a married relationship. Maybe it's is it adaptation or is it selection? So to put it differently, do long-term relationships lead to preferences for realism somewhere along the way? Or is it the case that realistic relationships lead to marriage? And, of course, as is always the case in social psychology, the truth is complicated and therefore both are probably true. It is probably the case that long-term relationships do eventually lead to preferences for realism, where you need the person to know who you really are and accept that, and otherwise you just are haunted by this insecurity that they don't really know who you are and they may not really be in love with the person that you really are. But it's also probably the case that realistic relationships lead to marriage. Those mutual admiration societies, much like Puka and Garu's, are possibly unsustainable, right? And at some point they have to be able to make that shift. And if they can't, either because self-disclosure leads people to find out something they don't like about the other person, or whatever, then they're probably not going to make it. Okay. So the takeaway, relationships that go long-term involve seeing someone for who they really are, being on the same page, sharing the same reality, and mutually accepting your partner's faults as well as their strengths. That doesn't mean you have to do this in a relationship, but it is symptomatic of a successful long-term relationship. And not all your relationships are going to be that. So again, this is not go do that kind of advice. It's more, this is what it would look like should you find yourself in those circumstances. So are there any questions about the marriage shift? Yes? What about the research on the forums? God, I can't remember the guy's name. If you email me, I can definitely find it, though. It's really? The men are from Mars, women are from Venus, people use the same terminology? Really? Ooh. Well, it wasn't John Gray. I promise you I did not bring men are from Mars, women are from Venus knowingly into my class. But if I did incidentally, then, you know, there you go. Maybe they're onto something. I don't know. Yes?
A little question about the last slide.
Absolutely.
The last statement there, mutually accepting their faults. Do you mean you and they accept their faults?
Oh, no, I mean you accept, you know, his or her faults, and he or she accepts your faults. That's what I meant, yeah. Yeah, it's not written very clearly, yeah. Yes? I think I've been implying a lot about sex in relationships this whole time, and I'm surprised you haven't caught that, because pretty much this whole time it's just been one sexual innuendo after another. I don't know. I didn't think it was that subtle, but I guess it is. Yeah, well, when I was saying that whole thing about cooperate, right? What do you think I was talking about? You think I was talking about, like, making dinner? I'm talking about making dinner. Yes. Does that answer your question? I don't know if that... Okay, all right, good. Yes. Sex is helpful for relationships, or so I hear. So, okay, so... Love and attachments. This is an excellent chapter from the Jonathan Haidt book, chapter 6, I believe. Right? Wrong? Thank you. All right, cool. Okay. Okay, chapter 6. This is an outstanding chapter. If you had to read, 25 pages, I have no idea how long this chapter is. If you had to read whatever number of pages about love and relationships, it would be the ones I would send you to. Those would be the pages I would have you read. And Haidt starts off his analysis by criticizing the myth of true love. And what is this myth of true love? And this is like Descartes in terms of being just the ultimate whipping boy in this area of research. People love to be like, oh, this whole troubadour myth about true love is so bogus. And you kind of go, does anybody really believe this? But I don't know. But some people say it. And you see it all the time in romantic comedies, right? Like Serendipity. Serendipity is the ultimate one. That you'll fall in love once with one person in the entire world who is perfect for you, and then you will remain in passionate love with that person forever. If you believe this, I hate to tell you this, but this is almost certainly not going to be true in your life. You're not going to fall in love. You're not going to... No, I'm just kidding. No, that's not the part... Nobody loves you. No, that's not the part that isn't true. What's not true is that there isn't just, there probably isn't just one person for you. Maybe there is. I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't even say that. But and the part where you remain in passionate love forever is the part that we'll criticize, or at least interrogate for how true it is. And I think there's limitations on that part of the myth of true love. So Haidt identifies, that's the part that he's going after. Is it the case you remain in passionate love forever, and that's what sustains the real true love that you need to be going and looking for? So in an effort to criticize this, Haidt identifies two kinds of love. One is passionate love, which which develops quickly, is intense and fleeting. And you know this kind of love, right? It's like it's hot. You look hot. You look like these people here. You know, you're like, oh my God, is it hot in here or is it us? You know, and you just that heat, you know, and you just feel it all the time. And and it's typified by that mutual admiration society thing of like, you're so perfect and bizarrely hot, you know, and my God, we're both hot, and it's intense, and sadly, this feeling is also fleeting, but it's good because it's hot. I mean, it's really, whew. Wow, you both wear red all the time. You don't even notice. You're like, man, we're wearing red. We look like people from like Serendipity. We look like people from this movie, you know, and it's true. It is true. You are very hot, and you are more attractive in this phase, I swear. You're exactly who you think you are. There's another kind of love, though, called companionate love, or this is what Jonathan Haidt calls it. You can call it whatever you want. And it develops slowly, involves trust, companionship, union, mutual compatibility, mutual acceptance. A lot of this fits really well with the marriage shift. Yeah, a lot of this fits really well with the marriage shift. And this tendency towards companionate love, it tends to develop slowly, but it forms a backbone, or Haidt argues this, it forms a backbone of long-term, sustained, effective relationships. And this is why it's the case that arranged marriages can actually work, right? Which is weird, right? Or we find it weird in this culture that arranged marriages could ever work, because we have this whole thing about how you got to find that one person that's perfect for you, you got to consult your preferences, go down that checklist, and be like, oh yes, okay, so she's a Baptist, she's a Democrat, she, takes the trash out, is very pretty, and she actually finds me attractive, or something like that. And then, boom, there you go. All right, we made the list, let's do it. Now, of course, this is not how it is, right? We don't have great insight on what we're really looking for, and it's not necessarily the case that that passionate love, that spark you get at the beginning of a relationship, is what it's all about. It feels like it's what it's all about. It feels very, very, very warm, even hot, but it's not actually what these long-term relationships tend to be sustained by as much. And this is why arranged marriages can surprisingly work. If your folks can get together and be like, aha, they're actually very compatible, they might not know this, it might actually work out. So you should all try to get into an arranged marriage. But a tough thing is the transition from the period in relationships where passionate love tends to dominate and be kind of the main thing that you feel to the phase of a relationship where companionate love sort of rules the day can be very difficult. It can be fraught with difficulty, and it can be hard to kind of say, like, what's going on, Like, is this relationship failing because I'm not, filled with this huge passionate love that we were experiencing at the beginning? It can be hard to interpret what's going on here, and this is a lot like the marriage shift, right? Where at the beginning, it's like you think the person's perfect, they think you're perfect, that's what you thought you were looking for, was somebody who thought you were perfect, that you think is perfect, and then later you're like, wait a second, it's not perfect. And one thing that Haidt talks about is these sobering realizations of the faults in the other person, right? Where you used to think they were perfect, and then you wake up one day, and you look over, and they're drooling on their pillow, And you're like, oh my God, why would they do that? They were supposed to be perfect, And they're doing it. They're just drooling, and sometimes it's awful. It can be terrible. And I'm going to talk more about okay, I'm going to stop. Okay, so, and these realizations are incredibly sobering, and a lot of people's reactions are to flee, right? You see the drool, and you just run out the door. You leave a vaguely scrawled note with the line running off because you're literally fleeing the scene. It often leads to a breakup, maybe 2, 3, 4 months into a relationship. But companionate love, which is the thing that's kind of beginning to happen in this phase, where you start to see the person realistically, and you start to figure out, maybe you're going to make that marriage shift, or put less pressure on it. Maybe you're going to make that relationship shift and see who they really are. They'll see who you are, and then maybe you will or will not accept that person. And that phase starts, that critical test starts when you wake up that morning and you have that sobering realization that the person is not perfect. That moment that you might think of as the beginning of the end might actually be the beginning of the beginning of the beginning of the beginning. Okay. So companionate love has its own benefits for relationships that can succeed and make that shift, and companionate love undergirds strong marriages. So Haidt talks about, and I'm putting this thing up here, and I hesitate to do this. This is an incredibly pseudo-scientific graph. Usually in a college class, you would be shown a graph like this that would be based on data, And this is just something John Haidt like doodled one day. This is absurdly non-scientific, and I need you all to promise that you will not show this to any of your other professors, for I will surely be fired. Okay, so Haidt presents this graph of these two kinds of love: companionate, which is like the dashed line here, and passionate. Oh shoot. Okay, companionate line is this solid line here, and passionate, which is this dashed, this more exciting line here. It's all over the place, as is the case. So, and this is the intensity of these two kinds of love over a 6-month period. And, you know, what you're seeing is, at the very beginning, relationships are all about the passionate love, right? You know, you're hot, they're hot, and yada, yada, yada. And then it's like all over the place. You're like, are they hot? Am I hot? I don't know, you know, like, and then, but it does persist. It doesn't go to 0 or anything, but it goes down over time, right? But then companionate love, is on its way up. It's on its way up for relationships that work. This is a survey of relationships that end up working. Now, sometimes companionate love never makes it, right? And it just kind of peters out here. Passionate love goes down as well. And in such a situation, you should probably break up. But Haidt identifies 2 danger points on this graph. And this is a very smart analysis. So sometimes people commit at the highest points of passion 2 months into the relationship. They run off to Vegas, which is dangerously close to here for all of you, by the way. This is when I've lived on the East Coast. I mean, this was not as dangerous a point as it is for you. This is a very real danger for all of you, and I want you to be careful. So people run off and they commit at the highest highs of passion. Now, that isn't always a mistake. It can work out maybe. It's unclear if it'll work out. It can work out, but it might not. And that danger point reminds me of this Johnny Cash, June Carter song, Jackson, with that quote up there. But another danger point, and this one's, I think everybody kind of knows about this one. Your parents definitely know about this one and are worried that you're going to do that. But another danger point is this one, and this one's not obvious. And here we have Jonathan Haidt to thank. For this is the one where you break up that morning when you see the person drooling and you discover they have faults and you discover that they're, a real person or whatever. And you go, wow, I thought I was dating somebody perfect. I'm out of here, Or worse yet, maybe you're the one drooling that morning. And they see that you're not perfect, and that's the part you don't like, and you take off. And that's very tempting, right? But Haidt would say this is a mistake. That instead, if you really understood how relationships worked, which it's hard to do, but this is based vaguely on data, so this can help us understand. And in a longer time frame of, say, 60 years, an amount of time, I'd love to be married because it would mean that I'd live to be over 90, but also it'd be nice to be married that long. That over a longer time span, if it's really going to work, what's going to come to dominate is going to be companionate love. And that's going to wind up being the big story. And passionate love is going to be important, and you're going to want to have that in your history, in your rearview mirror, and it's going to keep being important forever. It's going to be a non-zero part of it. But companionate love, trust, cooperation, not even just the cooperation, like the real cooperation, will form the backbone of an effective relationship. And so I leave you with this observation. I also leave you with a quote from the great relationship scholars of our generation. You can ask afterwards. Outcast. So this is a quote about long-term relationships, which I really like.